I mean, just start. Oh, wait. Nothing up there. And there's a remote control. Which one was it on now? Because,
Morning. Good morning, everybody. And welcome to the second Örecomm Festival. It's nice to see so many of you have made it so early. My name is Thomas Tufte, and together with Oscar, who sits here on the second row, we co-direct collectively this Center for Communication and Global Change. And we've had a nice team of people, Marie and Sophie and Robin and Liu and Mika and many others that have helped us organize this event. We have a 15-minute welcome session where our Vice Chancellor from Roskilde University will speak, and then I'll speak briefly and give you a few practical remarks, and then we'll move into the actual substance of the program. So I'd like to welcome E. Poulsen, Vice Chancellor of Roskilde University. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Good morning to you all, and welcome to Roskilde University. I am very glad to see so many of you have made it here, as Thomas just said, despite of the poor weather outside. And I know some of you have come from afar, both from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and from, of course, Europe. Welcome to Roskilde and to the Øresund region. I emphasize my welcome to the Øresund region. It is the area around the Øresund Strait which divides, or rather connects, Denmark and Sweden. The Øresund region covers the southwestern regions of Sweden and eastern parts of Denmark. It thus includes Malmö, Roskilde and Copenhagen. These are the three cities where the Örecomm Festival will unfold in the coming days. I also emphasize my welcome to the Øresund region because it is a region where many interesting activities have been developing in recent years. In university circles, I'm glad to announce that Stefan Bengtsson, Vice Chancellor of Malmö University, and I, in June of this year, signed an agreement of collaboration which will make collaboration across the strait easier in the years to come. The agreement of collaboration underscores the priority I wish to give to the collaboration with Malmö University. I'm therefore very happy to know that many of you are students, researchers and NGOs, representatives that have come across from Malmö this morning to participate in the Örecomm Festival, which we are initiating this morning. Welcome to you also here in Roskilde. What has been developing in the context of the Örecomm Center for Communication and Global Change is definitely one of the most interesting academic collaborations that has been evolving across the strait in recent years. Örecomm preceded the formal Malmö-Roskilde Agreement of Collaboration. It started back in 2008 as an academic network aiming to strengthen both research, collaboration, student mobility, and collaboration between academia and practitioners. In that sense, Örecomm has captured very well the spirit and vision of Roskilde University. It is the spirit of openness to the world around us, and it is the spirit of engagement with the society we live in and are part of. It is also the spirit of collaboration and strengthening the connections between academia and other institutions in society. Örecomm has put a lot of effort into making this vision come true, and I was therefore particularly happy when Örecomm in May of this year could move from being a more informal network initiative to be formalized as a center, the Örecomm Center for Communication and Global Change. This formalization materialized in the signing of a joint agreement between the heads of department at Roskilde University's Department of Communication, Business and Information Technologies and Malmö University's Department of Art, Culture and Communication. Congratulations to Örecomm for that achievement. However, rather than just congratulating Örecomm on formalities and past achievements, let me especially commend the timely initiative that this festival represents. Being so international, with speakers from almost 20 countries around the world, this festival speaks to true commitment to global issues, global networking, and to seeking dialogue across regions, cultures, and scientific paradigms. Most important, however, is the chosen topic. The festival this year is entitled Reclaiming the Public Sphere, Communication, Power, and Social Change. It is a topic which resonates with some of the most important events the world has experienced in recent times. The social uprisings seen across many regions of the world, in Northern Africa, the Middle East, in Southern Europe, in Iran, in Thailand, and in the North American Occupy movement. These social uprisings have used media in many creative ways. However, artistic expression, the voice of the intellectuals, music and other forms of expressions have also been part and parcel of these claims from ordinary citizens. Claims to be included, to be heard, to be seen and involved in development of society. It is therefore very interesting for me to see that your program reflects this breadth of participation and engagement by citizens into the public sphere. In fact, before becoming a Vice-Chancellor, I was for many years a media and communication scholar interested in issues around the public sphere, so I am very happy to see this fascinating agenda. I also find it very commendable that Örecomm engages with unpacking the difficult relations between communication processes, power relations, and the aspirations for a better society for all. Again, this is very much in line with the sort of research, debate, and commitment Roskilde University wishes to support. I therefore wish you all, presenters and participants, both you here in the room and those of you participating online, I wish you all the best for the coming 4 days. I hope you will enjoy your stay here in the Øresund region and at Roskilde University in particular. Thank you.
Time out. Okay. Okay, can you hear me? Let's see if this is working. Yeah. Okay. Like the Vice Chancellor, I also want to welcome everybody to our university and to this, as I said before, second Örecomm Festival. Thanks for making it here from far away and from across the strait and also from around the corner. You're all very welcome. And also thanks to Ib Poulsen, our Vice Chancellor, for his words of support and for coming here today and opening our festival. I'd actually like to connect my words of welcome with Ib Poulsen's closing remarks, emphasizing the topical relevance and timeliness of this year's Örecomm Festival. As you all know, this year we've chosen to focus on issues addressing the public sphere, issues of communication practices in and around the public sphere, issues of power struggles and power relations, and how citizens can achieve or not a say in public debate and deliberation. Like last year's festival, this year's festival is very much informed by and inspired by the recent events in the world, in particular by the many social uprisings that have swept the world since Tunisia in December 2010, Or we can go a few steps further back in the timeline and include Iran, Thailand, and probably many other places. The point is that people from across the globe have recently made themselves heard in previously unheard ways. The demands have been pretty simple. They have been claims for basic citizen rights, claims articulated by so many citizens across the world that lack the feelings of and the experiences with and the formal recognition of being citizens in their own countries. Or rather, citizens maybe they are, but with no citizenship. The topic of this Örecomm Festival speaks to one of the most fundamental and basic human rights that we have. The right to be included, to be heard, seen, recognized, and involved in the development of our society. The right to have rights, to have opportunities, and obviously to have obligations. The social uprisings the world has experienced have been about this. The lack of these rights constitute probably the most significant single development challenge of today. So, in the light of these enormous challenges, we have narrowed the topic down a little more. I hope you agree. And we're focusing on how different stakeholders are engaging in the public sphere. Here, we arrive at the field of research and practice that unites, if not all of us, then at least most of us here in the room and online, which is media, cultural, and communication research and practice in the broad sense, or communication for development and social change more specifically. The twin phenomena of globalization and mediatization are today posing interesting challenges to our understanding of public sphere or spheres and of political action. On the one hand, the national frame is largely being replaced or supplemented by transnational communication and cultural flows. On the other hand, the mass media, which have formed the backbone of the public sphere, are now losing ground to the new social media and other forms of opinion making and communication. And of political mobilization, or what Manuel Castells has defined as mass self-communication. An often quoted article in The Economist even suggested that the era of mass media was coming to an end, bringing us back to the coffee houses. And the American media scholar Zizi Papakarisi goes a step further and argues that the spaces the new media are creating are private spheres, which are becoming the core spheres for democracy in the digital age. As Oscar and I wrote in our concept note in preparing for this festival, reclaiming the public sphere should perhaps have a question mark to it. It does hopefully spark many questions, which we are to discuss in the coming 4 days, like, for example, rather than retrieving the public sphere in the Habermasian sense, are the new means of communication and political action shaping and constituting new public spheres in the plural? And what are the implications of this multiplication of spheres? And who are the new players in the public arenas of the present? And what processes of power brokering are taking place? And how do the communicative practices, the negotiation of power, and the formation and negotiation of social relations all come together in and around the public spheres? And how do public spheres relate to public space, be it physical cityscapes or virtual environments? The negotiation of power is not only connected to formal institutional processes of elections and the formation of representative democracies, but is just as much about the processes of governmentality in everyday life. We negotiate power in our everyday social and cultural practices, and thus also in our participation in the public spheres, be they mediated or not. And these processes of power brokering have implications for who influences processes of social change. So, in putting together our program for this festival, we've deliberately sought to bring together as many types of voices, those of stakeholders who take action, deliberate, and participate and reflect upon the power brokering of the public sphere. You're sitting here today, and online, representatives from NGOs, media and communication scholars, artists, rappers, students, activists, fiction writers, journalists, and many other media professionals, and probably a series of other types of participation in the public spheres, or participants in the public spheres, or claimants to the public sphere. I hope I can talk on behalf of all of us that we're looking forward to this dialogue these coming days across sciences and disciplines, and hopefully we can break down some of the disciplinary silos and boundaries in search for common ground. It's the hope of us that have planned and organized this festival that the conversations, the walks through Copenhagen this evening, the experiences shared, the book launches, the buffets, the music and the coffee breaks, all will contribute to building a stronger discipline of communication for development and social change. Build a field that transcends current disciplinary boundaries in order better to grasp, analyze and act within the reality of today. As the Vice-Chancellor just said a moment ago, Örecomm was recently formalized as a research center. We call it a Center for Communication and Global Change. Having this formalization as a center in place now commits us to continuing the building, to build this field in the intersection of research and practice. And we do hope you'll help us participating, deliberating and engaging. I'm also happy to announce that it's not more than 10-12 days ago that Oscar, Marie and myself were in New York attending a very initial consultative meeting of some 30 people involved in communication for development worldwide, either as practitioners or academics. The meeting was called for by UNICEF and the Communication Initiative, and out of our 2-day meeting came an agreement and a commitment to work to establish a global association for communication for development. A working group was established, and Örecomm is part of it, working towards a broader call to further build and formalize a global forum, an association, where some of the types of discussions we will have in this festival can continue and hopefully proliferate. We believe this field is a thriving one, and we sense it's a field on the move. And given the world we live in, it should be. So let me once again thank you for coming here or for joining us online, and wish you all a good and inspiring festival. Thanks very much. I'm the facilitator this morning. I'm already doing a poor job. I'm 4 minutes behind schedule. But let me briefly announce a few practicalities before I introduce our first speaker. Hopefully you've all received conference bags or folders with the full program and all of the abstracts to the speakers. And you have to remember that this afternoon you have to choose between two different parallel sessions. This morning we're going to have 3 speakers. It's not panels, but 3 individual speakers, keynote speakers, with a short break after the first speaker, Nick Couldry, and then a coffee break after the second speaker, just so you know. And lunch will be over in the university cafeteria. For those of you who have paid, the table should be set when we get over there. And for the rest of you, you'll have to queue in the cafeteria. Or eat your medbragte madpakke, whatever you say, the food you brought from home. And there's a very interesting walk this evening where we're going to explore the city space from a very interesting angle, which relates Denmark's past history in the slave trade to current Copenhagen. And Anne-Sophie will speak a little more about that just before we break for lunch, I think. Anne-Sophie is here somewhere, or outside. And finally, for those of you online who want to ask questions, if you're not a ComDev student, or even though if you are a ComDev student in Malmö, all of you can use the Twitter with this hashtag Örecomm 2012 to pose your questions to Nick. Or you can also pose them, those of you who are ComDev students, on your workspace online. So let me quickly move forward to our first keynote speaker, who is Professor Nick Couldry, who has been a guest before at Roskilde a few years ago, and who is a professor of media and communications, and also a joint head of the media department at Goldsmith at University of London. He's also the director of the Center for the Study of Global Media and Democracy. A very productive media scholar, an author and editor of 10 books, including Media Society, World, Social Theory, and Digital Media Practice. We have small pamphlets outside marketing that book. And then and he's also the author of this book, Why Voice Matters, Culture and Politics After Neoliberalism. And I suspect that Nick's speech today will be associated with this book. And the title of Nick's presentation is Voice Blind, Moving Beyond the Paradoxes of the Neoliberal State. So welcome very much to Nick Couldry.
Check this one. Ah, good. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Good. Well, thanks to Thomas for the introduction and for the invite to speak at this wonderful conference. I accepted immediately. It's great to be back in Roskilde, and it's a real honour to give the first keynote of this wonderful interdisciplinary, multi-city, many-nation conference. The conference's theme is Reclaiming the Public Sphere. When land is reclaimed from the sea, a common story in Denmark, Britain, and many other countries, major work must be done to redirect the sea's flow and to plan and build new types of foundations strong enough to support life on land. And let me just say immediately that I'll be releasing the script of the speech, so if anyone finds I'm going a bit too fast in English, they will have the chance to read the script later, just for people in the conference. Okay, so don't worry if it's a little fast, but hopefully it won't be. So we need to build new types of foundations when we reclaim land from the sea, but so too with democracy. In many countries, the experience of democracy has been eroded for decades by flows that once seemed supportive of democratic expression, but which have damaged its very basis. I refer to what in my book, Why Voice Matters, I call the crisis of voice in neoliberal democracies. To survive this crisis, to rebuild a democratic culture after neoliberalism, we need to be very attentive to where the energies of democracy are flowing right now and to where they might be redirected. The circumstances of that rebuilding will be difficult and unstable. They will require clear-sightedness as to the conditions for new voices to be sustained. So overcoming the paradoxical state, which I call voice blindness, that characterizes the present. How we might start to do this is the main topic of my talk. Let me start with the problem. The problem which is the multi-level crisis of voice in which we find ourselves, at least in neoliberal democracies. By neoliberal democracies, I mean states with the formal properties of democracies, which have been dominated for decades by neoliberal doctrine. But I hope my argument will also be relevant to many countries that don't see themselves as neoliberal democracies, which may be aiming at a different type of democracy. I think we can't escape neoliberalism. That's why I think it may be relevant to everyone, even though I'm starting from Britain and the problems of Britain. You'll forgive me my problems. So, by a crisis of voice, I mean a situation where, in many domains, voice is continually offered, yet retracted, endorsed, but then made empty. The contradictions of late modern democratic politics are, of course, multiple and complex. I don't mean to understate that complexity, but I want to insist, as one element in the mix, on the specific intent of neoliberal doctrine over 3 decades to make market functioning the overriding principle of social and political organization. The core of neoliberal doctrine, popularized by Milton Friedman and others in 1970s America and Britain, but with roots going back almost 2 centuries. The core of neoliberal doctrine was stated most clearly by Michel Foucault in his book The Birth of Biopolitics, who identifies an early and very deep rethinking of liberal governmentality that does not ask the state what freedom it will leave to the economy, but asks the economy how its freedom can have a state-creating function. Here are the seeds of the idea, now so familiar, that markets themselves provide a principle of social organisation, and therefore in turn a preferred model for transforming politics. Neoliberal discourse is an attack not just on particular conditions of political speech or voice in the familiar sense of the word, but also an attack on the very idea that the opinions, desires, and goals of human beings might matter in the organisation of social and economic resources. And familiar here is the type of intellectual imperialism of a certain type of economic thought that, as Wendy Brown puts it, while foregrounding the market, is not only or even primarily focused on the economy. It involves extending and disseminating market values to all institutions and social action. Now, what do I mean by voice? The term I diagnose as being in crisis. Well, first of all, I mean by voice the process whereby people give an account of the world within which they act. I don't mean life stories. I just mean saying, that's wrong, or I'm here and I'm not getting resources. Voice could be something small but important. It's not a life story. And this process, of course, is reflexive. It's embodied. It requires a material form, which may be individual, collective, or nowadays through Twitter and so on, distributed. The process of voice also relies on socially produced resources, and it's oriented to social exchange. That's why voice can be undermined by an organisational rationality that takes no account of voice. So models for organising life that place no value on voice undermine it, erode it, by crowding out alternative narratives that would authorise us to value voice. And I call such models voice-denying rationalities, and neoliberalism is such a rationality. Neoliberalism operates with an account of the social as a space for expanding freedom modelled only on economic competition that lacks most features associated with social life. If it is ever to be resisted, neoliberal rationality must be opposed by what Wendy Brown calls a counter-rationality, a different figuration of human beings, citizenship, economic life, and the political. That's what must be established if democratic culture is to be rebuilt, or alternatively a new type of democracy built in places which have not had democracy before. But you may say things are much more complicated than that, and of course they are. The current crisis of democracy, for example in Europe, is much more than a cultural construction. It is a profoundly practical crisis, a crisis of economic and political management. Neoliberalism's slogan that markets are always right has been intensely contested, if not destroyed, ever since the financial collapse and the banking crisis of autumn 2008. And yet, the crisis of democratic functioning continues. Indeed, the democratic crisis has only deepened over the past year to a point where whatever voter majorities say in Greece, Spain, France, and so on, whatever they say, the same measures, budget cuts, labour market flexibilisation, public service privatisation, get imposed on the basis that global markets demand it. Today's crisis of voice, then, is shaped not just by neoliberal doctrine, but by the independent, practical reality that national governments' control over their national economies has been drastically reduced during 3 decades of expanding global financial markets. As Colin Lees pointed out over a decade ago in his book Market-Driven Politics, the internationalised state is characterised not just by its exposure to the huge growth in global capital markets, but just as important, by the huge increase in national economies' dependence on foreign direct investment. And this process has only intensified since the 1997 figures that Lees uses in his book. It's intensified particularly in Britain. So if we use 2010 UNCTAD figures, if we look at inward foreign direct investment as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product, the economy basically, then the UK's percentage has grown since 97 from 19% to 49%. And it's also grown rather sharply in Denmark too, from 13 to 45%. As a result, national governments face increasing pressures to adopt policies that are favourable to global markets, even disregarding the bond markets. They need the investment. They need to be open for business, as we say in the economic speak. So what we call the economy, nationally, regionally, globally, seems beyond democratic control. The theorist of the market state, Philip Bobbitt, makes the same point, but more vividly. He regards the contemporary nation-state's attempts to control global markets as like those of a bear chained to a stake, trying to chase a shifting beam of light. And during the unresolved euro crisis of the past year, intergovernmental meetings have become, I think, like a sad circus of trapped animals, gesturing at democratic freedom, but with no effect. So we become accustomed, we become used to the idea that democracy does not work. And on many levels. We may already be accustomed to this on the smaller scale in the organisations where we are employed, where we work. Organisations that may be dominated by what the British financial sociologist Michael Power calls audit culture. The Vice-Chancellor is here, or he's gone? He's gone, okay, I can say this now. Okay, this audit culture, maybe he would agree, I don't know, supplants internal democratic processes and replaces them with the demands of economic necessity. Now, of course, people say that we need to be audited for democratic monitoring, to make good use of resources, and that's true. But as Power points out, whatever the apparently democratic motivation of the audit process requires trust in experts. It is not a basis for rational public deliberation. It's a dead end in the claim of accountability. Audit is in this respect a substitute for democracy rather than its aid. And remember, this is not some crazy cultural studies guy writing here. This is a sociologist of accounting at the London School of Economics describing what he sees in front of him. So he's a good ally, I think. Now, celebratory theorists of the market state, like Philip Bobbitt, who was the campaign manager or campaign supporter of John McCain against Obama in 2008, celebrators of the market state may be more alive to its contradictions than conventional, including left-wing, political commentary. Writing in 2003, Bobbitt announced the replacement of the nation-state by the market state as world markets are restructured on supranational lines. The aim of national governments, he argues, shifts from maximising the welfare of citizens to maximising citizens' opportunities for participation in global markets. But the offer of participation in government cannot be completely abandoned if government is to retain any legitimacy. Instead, he argues that offer must become contradictory. There will be more public participation in government, but it will count for less. And there's a deeper contradiction. Because the legitimacy of the market state has its roots in the public goods necessary for any quality of life, goods that, as Bobbitt admits, the market is not well adapted to creating or maintaining, those are his words, then there's a problem. And what are these public goods? Well, they are loyalty, civility, trust in authority, respect for family life, and so on. So this is the underlying paradox of neoliberal politics, that neoliberal doctrine requires social goods that its market principles directly undermine. And if today's crisis of voice involves a genuine impasse, namely how to manage economic life democratically at all, on any level, then the only way forward must be a great deal of collective, practical effort to rethink how populations can manage what we call the economy. Efforts in that direction have, of course, only just started. But again, we must complicate our analysis further, since this impasse of democratic management in all economies has a lot in common with deeper historical problems that have afflicted the concept of democracy from the beginning. Let me draw for a moment on the French political theorist Pierre Rosanvallon and his recent book, Political Legitimacy. If today's crisis of democratic management can be seen as a conflict of different times or temporalities, in other words, a conflict between the time of global markets, which can move within minutes against a national economy through the bond markets, and, on the other hand, the time of democratic decision-making, which can never be synchronized with the changing demands of those global markets. So if the democratic crisis within the euro crisis is such a conflict of times and temporalities, then, Rosanvallon notes, we find just such a contradiction in the discussions on democracy that followed the French Revolution. It was the Marquis de Condorcet, Rosanvallon points out, none of us have read him, I suspect, who realized in 1790 that the popular deliberation in a democracy requires a reflective context whose time must always extend beyond the moment of an election or the moment when an elected government has to make a difficult decision. As a result, democracy inevitably involves multiple temporalities. And the role of popular will somehow is to connect up those temporalities into something more coherent. Only in this way, he argues, can we restore the dimension of political legitimacy that he calls the legitimacy of reflexivity. And here Rosanvallon notes that civil society organizations, NGOs, if you like, and so on, make a vital contribution to government's response to these contradictions. How? By denouncing, he argues, discrepancies, conflicts between the fundamental principle of democracy and the reality. By reintroducing the people as principle into the political arena. We can understand the Occupy movement, the Indignados, in just this way. So today's democratic crisis has historical roots that long predate neoliberalism. But Rosanvallon sees another problem of legitimacy that runs alongside the difficulty of organising democratic reflection to match the speed of government decision-making. And this further problem he calls the legitimacy of proximity, which is more complicated. It's basically the conflict between the distance from everyday life that's necessary if anything is to be governed at all, and the proximity, the closeness to everyday life that's necessary if government is to have any legitimacy at all. Rulers within this new model must be present to the people. Contemporary media, of course, provide practical ways for politicians to be present to the people and for the experiences of particular people to be presented to government. But there's a risk, Rosanvallon argues, of this media interface between government and people collapsing into an empty spectacle which obstructs actual decision-making. And in response to this problem, he argues, we need new forms of democratic experimentation that allow citizens to become involved in government through new types of engagement that would involve a better exchange of information between government and society. So to sum up this point, through his rich analysis, Rosanvallon opens our eyes to the continuing value of democratic experiment, the possibility of new forms of democratic invention that might point beyond the current crisis. The static notion of the general will in earlier democratic theory, he argues, has to be refreshed, renewed, by what he calls a constant generalization of the social, but without collapsing into a pure localism that ignores the very real coordination problems that any government, any society now faces. So, moving to the second part of my talk, how might we as citizens respond to these difficult challenges that face the practice of democracy anywhere today? And here I will make 3 points. First of all, on the importance of saying no. Second, on the importance of saying yes. And third, on the importance of reorienting ourselves away from false arenas of democratization to other more promising ones. My first point is that future democratic experimentation that we will discuss in this conference cannot succeed unless it is willing to say no to the forces that negate democracy. And those forces are quite subtle. They're not necessarily the force of the army or the military. Saying no does not, of course, require an act of violence. Its negation operates at the level of discourse. In José Saramago's wonderful novel Seeing, in Portuguese, excuse my bad Portuguese, Ensaio sobre a lucidez, published 1 year after the deeply undemocratic decision of some countries, including my own, to go to war in Iraq. In that novel, saying no takes the form of submitting an election voting paper that is blank. It takes a rainy day like today, everyone votes, but when the government opens the voting boxes, no one has voted. Every paper is blank. And this simple rejection of what is on democratic offer, very ambiguous as to why did people do this, but completely clear in its enunciation what people had done. It works, especially if, as in the novel, it's repeated a second time. The government called another election, and still people said nothing. This works as if it were an act of symbolic violence against the principle of government. In the novel, it's interpreted as an act of actual violence by a government which is blind to this new act of seeing or democratic vision, lucidez, that is underway. As a leader of a local council says to the Home Minister in the novel, "Whether you like it or not, Minister, it is night now, pitch black night. We know that something is happening that goes far beyond our understanding, that exceeds our meagre experience, but we are behaving as if it were the same old bread, made with the usual flour and cooked in the usual oven." What more specifically must we say no to in today's crisis of voice? Well, at least two separate things. First, the idea so often insisted upon by governments that market values and the overall necessity of market functioning can and should override other important values, such as voice, such as democratic functioning. Following the near collapse of the global financial system in autumn 2008, we're now beginning to see, even from the most mainstream sources, an insistence on at least some limits to the dominance of market values. It's surely interesting when Elizabeth, the daughter of Rupert Murdoch, don't often quote the Murdochs, but I think when they say good things, I still quote them, in her speech to the Royal Television Society at the Edinburgh Festival last month, argued that we should reject the idea that the free market is the only sorting mechanism, only organising mechanism for public life. More substantially, Harvard philosopher Michael Sandel argues in his recent book, What Money Can't Buy, that market reasoning empties public life of moral argument. He says that when the logic of buying and selling, sorry, that should be selling, not seeing. I had seeing in my mind there. Logic of buying and selling increasingly governs the whole of life, it's time to ask whether we want to live this way. Sandel quite directly says no to the expansion of market mechanisms as the sole regulator of, for example, the distribution of public goods like health. But he's weaker on the political causes of the moral blind spots that he identifies. He condemns the general moral vacancy of contemporary politics, as if all of us were somehow to blame for the principle that markets override other public values. We're all to blame for this. Rather oddly, he accuses the American Tea Party and the Occupy movement of failing to give moral attention to the role and reach of markets, which ignores the contradictory moralism of the American right, who do, in a sense, care about markets, and ignores completely the rejection by the Occupy movement of markets' excessive influence over everyday life. We also must say no to those specific forms of politics, not all of them explicitly neoliberal, think of Tony Blair, that refuse to say no to markets, that are indeed based on translating markets' supposed necessity into political and cultural reality. A paradox of the neoliberal state, not just in Britain, has been that in order to ensure the spread of markets, governments must interfere massively in the regulation of social and economic life. An example is the creeping marketisation, privatisation of the British National Health Service, which has generated the most chaotic attempt by the British government to change how health goods are produced and distributed, basically by transforming doctors into the people who decide how health goods are allocated. Consortia of doctors who will be ready to be influenced by the drug companies and the health insurers, as in America. Now, there's no democratic mandate for that reform, and there's widespread opposition within the health professions. Yet, the process of reform goes on under the banner of modernisation, markets, and so on. Now, my argument today, of course, is not about the details of the British case, but it's a wider point, that reforms such as the health privatisation happening now in Britain are ways to enclose, for private gain, decision-making processes that should be accountable to public values. As with audit culture, new types of expertise gain power, particularly the vast consultancy industry that serves health provision. And this obscures the fact that these consultants, experts, operate in what was once a zone for public deliberation, public decisions, a zone that remains largely subsidised from public money through taxation. As in the economy generally, therefore, we have to get better at saying no to the authority of economic commentators, spokespersons for business and for corporate power, who claim to dominate the debate on the economy and the management of public resources. It's not a question, of course, of rejecting genuine expertise. We need that. But of rejecting the illegitimate claims of certain types of experts to control decisions that are properly public decisions, decisions for all of us, decisions that relate to the distribution of social goods and social resource. Which takes me to my next point, that any strategy of saying no, in order to be effective, must be based in alternative possibilities of saying yes. New ways, saying yes to new ways of organising resources, decision-making, democratic representation. To quote Elizabeth Murdoch again, profit without purpose is a recipe for disaster. But what sort of purpose? Whose purpose? Generating such alternatives is very difficult, yet they're essential to escaping today's impasse of democratic government. Such alternatives are at the heart of this conference. Longer-term alternatives require us to grasp, to say yes to, useful democratic experiment wherever it occurs. As I noted before, the Occupy movement was an attempt to form Rousseau's general will in new ways. As such, it was a fundamental contribution to the contemporary crisis of democracy. The Occupy movement interrupted the routine of what Rosanvallon calls counter-democracy. There are many ways, certainly strengthened by media and social media, there are many ways in which we can now undermine the reputation of politicians. Say they're bad, stupid, corrupt, so undermining trust in the possibility of government. They interrupted that by operating Occupy on at least two levels. First, Occupy said yes to the possibility of thinking differently about the consequences of global markets. Occupy ignored the supposed necessity of what the markets say and asserted a more basic truth, that the economy, on whatever scale, remains our way as human beings of organising our resources for a better life. Amartya Sen insisted 25 years ago in his book on ethics and economics that we must restore economics to the domain of the political and the ethical, the common pursuit of the elements of a good life together. But to do so, and this is perhaps why his arguments have been ignored for so long, to do so requires rethinking ourselves as political subjects, as political actors. Our saying yes to our possible role in deciding how the economy should be. And nothing could be harder than this. That is, trying to see the economy once more as a site of decision, as a process necessarily open to democratic accountability. This requires new acts of citizenship, in Engin Aysin's term, new habits of treating ourselves and those around us as citizens with a valid contribution to make on how the economy should be run, on how resources should be organised. And this is where the collectives of the Occupy movement, permanent residents and those who visited for a day or a night, the collectives of the Occupy movement and their educational resources and debates were, I think, important ways, and this is the second level on which Occupy said yes, important ways of generalising the social, as Rosenvallon puts it. That is, bringing a different range of people into the processes through which we enact a social that can represent us. But such important experiments are not enough unless they are recognised by government and by a significant body of citizens not involved in them. If governments and most citizens remain blind to the fact that those new processes of democratic voice are happening and require a political response, then these experiments won't go very far, which is what's happened so far in Britain. That's the risk then from us, all of us, remaining voice blind. Blind, that is, to the wider conditions needed to sustain new and effective forms of voice for the long term. Which takes me to my final point, that in developing such experiments of forming the general will, we must not be misled by false offers of collectivity. Nearly 4 decades ago, the geographer Henri Lefebvre wrote in his book The Production of Space of the mirage effect of capitalism, the illusion of transparency that capitalist spaces of exchange create. He argues that if we keep our eyes and ears fixed only within those spaces, real life can appear quite close to us. He believes that's an illusion. Now, this warning, controversial though it may be, I think is a good antidote. It's a good warning to a lot of the rhetoric that today surrounds social media platforms. Those platforms' importance in everyday habit, their role as the context for some historic moments of mobilization in Egypt, Tunisia, and elsewhere, that's not in doubt. Of course, that's true. But we have to ask, what is the long-term price that these platforms demand in return for the sense of immediacy that they provide? The space that we're in when we're on a platform like Facebook is a space whose very design is organized to one primary end, to the ever more precise and continuous tracking of individual actions and choices to generate income, money. Money for data collectors, money for content providers, platform owners, and of course, driving it all, advertisers. As the most perceptive analyst of this revolution underway in the digital public world, Joseph Thoreau notes in his book The Daily You, the centrality of corporate power is a direct reality at the very heart of the digital age. If we still then, even in a small part, believe in Habermas's vision of the public sphere, if we still believe in the positive historical reference point of the 18th century English coffee house as a place where a certain limited male elite spoke freely and without censorship on the basis of circulated content they called newspapers, if we still hold on to that, then we know immediately that we live today in a radically different space of possibility, a different world. Nearly all of us, or at least 955 million of us, according to Facebook's latest figures, may be there in the potential public space that social media provide. But if we keep to the metaphor of the coffee house, this is a space where every gesture we make, every sip from our cup of coffee, our every movement as we scan the news is tracked. And by being tracked, provides the basis for slightly different content, perhaps a slightly different cup of coffee, to be delivered to us next time, one we will like better. All against an ever-adapting backcloth of advertisements delivered to us wherever we go, not just in the coffee house. Adverts for great coffee when we go out in the street because we drank that coffee in the coffee house and so on. So, we need to be very careful, I think, today before we rush into claiming that in this or that place online, the people are gathered. For the lateral social network, the collective voicing of what appears to be real life close to us, that itself has become the main focus of meaning production in today's media industries. That's what they're trying to produce, that sense of collectivity. Which complicates things when the citizens of today's nation states in the world enter an era of huge collective experiment in the forms of democracy. Such experiments will, of course, have no choice but to use social media platforms on their way to other discoveries. So it's not a matter of ignoring the forms that everyday social life now takes, and still less of retreating from them into some realm of pure thought. It's a matter of judging them clear-sightedly for whether they actually contribute or hinder the development of democracy. And for this I suggest, this is where I end, we have two guides that are especially useful. First of all, the value of voice that I've argued for today, which has found expression in the economic and development policy field through the recommendations of Amartya Sen and others, as the report, which I can say more about if you're interested. And second and finally, as mentioned earlier, a great guide is the fables, the novels of the late José Saramago. Saramago's novel Seeing is double-edged. It's ambiguous. It's not just governments, he writes, in effect, but all citizens who need to see clearly before them the new possibilities of voice now emerging and the tough preconditions that must be fulfilled if those possibilities are to be sustained. And this transformation, this shift in our current ways of seeing and not seeing, this shift is difficult. We may hear voices of protest, follow them, and yet remain voice blind, blind to the conditions of and potentials for a wider and more sustained transformation. The challenge then, as expressed by Saramago, is to end this blindness and to see right in front of us the ground both of our despair and of our new experiments of hope. Thanks for listening.
Thanks a lot, Nick, for a very inspiring opening address. We have a few minutes. Let's take almost 10 for a few comments and questions. Are there any of the onliners or anybody in the room who wants to take Nick's challenge up for the challenge of being voice blind in our contemporary society? Norbert.
Thanks
Thanks, Nick, for a very inspiring talk, like always. I want to question, and I think you agree with this objective, how we understand voice, because I think we're sometimes trapped in a kind of delineation and a kind of conceptualization that we always think about the more visible, spectacular conceptualizations of voice, like the kind of visibility in social transformations like the Arab Spring. And that brings me to your remarks on Michael Power's view on audit culture, which I understood, I haven't read Michael Power's, that it's a critique of horizontal, internal, expert-driven audit mechanisms, like co-opted by the state, co-opting the citizens if they engage in that. But I want to question that because recently I've been working a lot on evidence-based advocacy, which goes beyond mere deliberation, beyond mere debate in the public sphere. It's and also, in a way, rejecting the kind of what seems to me deterministic view of Michael Power's on the dangers of almost automatically and unavoidable co-option by the state or the market. So I want to point your attention and ask you how, what kind of civic engagement, what kind of broadened voice you can imagine that goes beyond the protest rebellion and which goes more in the direction of people's voice as experts. And I think, of course, specifically about beyond audits, thinking about social audits, about social accountability mechanisms, and of course also the question which role new digital media play in these processes. So in a way, whether they are then combined with the more vertical institutionalized mechanisms of accountability or market-driven accountability, or whether they stand for them alone. And this takes basically up an argument which Beth Simone Novak makes in her Wiki Government, where she said, we need more than just deliberation. We need voice, which is also the citizen as an expert who is in his skills drawn into government decisions. And so I think...
Well, thanks for the question. And oh, okay. Well, yes, sure, yeah.
Do we have a... Yes, no, I have two questions from you online, and then I think you can... Is that okay?
Of course, yes.
I think in a way they probably connect to Norb's question. One is from Tove Silveira Wennergren. What risks have you seen with commercial social media platforms in relation to Arab uprisings? And a connected question from Kwabena Boateng. Does social media give us a false sense of voice and hope for change?
What was the second one?
Does social media give us a false sense of voice and hope for change?
Great. Okay. Let me start with Norbert. In fact, it was you who introduced me to Beth Novak, and I've been grateful to you ever since. So, and I didn't go to that extra level of discussion in the time I had. But yes, you're right. It can't be that audit, in the sense of monitoring how we use resources, is bad in itself. That's exactly what we have to do to use resources well. I think what power means by audit process is the way that type of monitoring is normally put into practice in contemporary societies, where the government sets targets which must be kept to, which are absolute, and then regulators follow those and so on. And he's just getting at the type of expertise that gets built up through that process. So to come up with a different notion of audit, we would have to rethink the notion of expertise. First of all, as you say, to bring new range of people into expertise and acknowledge they have expertise too. And of course, this is what the participatory budget movement has done in Brazil. And I'm not an expert on that. I'm be interested to hear later whether people feel that's worked or not. We, in fact, have participatory budgeting in Britain. It was introduced by the new Labour government at a time of crisis. But I've never heard anything of it since. It happened, technically, but nothing followed. So I think there are two problems. One is you genuinely have to expand the expertise. Secondly, often nothing happens because it's a very small part of the budget that's consulted on, and there are no consequences to the decision. So what I discuss in the voice book is it's not just enough to speak, and this starts leading to the second question. We have to, that voice, that speaking, has to be registered. Things have to change as a result of it. It has to be reflected in decision-making process. And then when those things happen and people are not happy, they have to have the chance to speak again and say, this is not what I meant. We meant something else. So there has to be a longer process. Now that, I think it goes without saying, is not the way audit currently works. Audit is experienced by all of us as an absolute process where you have no choice but to meet certain requirements. And if you don't, you can stop doing business, not be a politician or whatever. Rethinking the audit process is a very good point, and Hilary Wainwright, the editor of Red Pepper in Britain, has written quite a bit about trying to rethink the state, taking into account these sort of points. So you're right, there's a much bigger debate there, and it does relate to who is an expert or not, and Novak comes up with some really fascinating and complicated solutions, so that's a great point for further discussion. The points from online about the role of social media, I was putting that in to be a little bit provocative, partly because I've recently read this Joe Turow book called The Daily You, which is a deeply depressing book, looking at the future of social media spaces, but also the future of all online platforms. And he argues there's been a shift, whereas for a long time, for a century or 2 centuries, advertisers, to reach their audiences, had to subsidize those who produce the content, the newspaper owners, because they couldn't get to their audiences any other way. He's now arguing they can get to their audiences another way through very sophisticated big data tools that track everything Nick Couldry has done in the past year, where he's been, what cup of coffee he drank, in order to predict whether I'll buy another cup of coffee in Roskilde today. And this data is sold on online auctions minute to minute. And his argument is that that type of subsidy no longer requires, it doesn't matter for that type of advertiser what the content is. It could be any content that I log into. What is your birthday? Do you like this or that colour? Anything that gets my data in enables it to be linked with all the other data that exists somewhere on me, and someone can sell that fact that I've just accessed that site. And he argues, therefore, this is a big shift in the economics that drive content production. So in answer to the questions, I'm not making the point, and I think I may have cut this out in the speech, I'm not making the point that there's something wrong about the type of social experiences online. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying also that it's wrong that we spend a lot of time on Facebook, as some people argue. I'm pointing to these new arguments that are just starting now to say that the economic basis of any platform like Facebook, and Facebook's successor, because Facebook may be going down, but something will follow it, is based around selling our social networks, which are linked to us as we go online. In other words, the thing that we most value, our usness, our togetherness, is the thing that is also the value that needs to be produced to sustain advertising, commercial production generally, and anything like content production that we've known before. So I'm not saying this is bad and we have no choice but to be online, and I'm certainly not saying that social media were bad in relation to these Arab revolutions. They were clearly an important condition of the transformation. I don't disagree with that at all, although I think it's been exaggerated how important they were. Tunisia was originally said to be a Twitter revolution, and very few people were on Twitter in Tunisia, it turns out. But this point is a different one, that even the infrastructures we think are so important for us, where we come together, are themselves the ones being invested in by corporate power right now in a way that will, well, you could say, what's the problem? Yes, they can advertise to me better. Maybe that doesn't matter. But the problem comes when the content that's on offer to us itself becomes changed to work better as something which will attract us as consumers. And then will what be the possibilities of reaching alternative news through the mainstream outlets, unless you are a different type of expert who knows where to look. So it's a big question, but I just wanted to throw it in because I think it's something all of us worry about, and we can't run away from that question. Disappointing and frightening, though it is.
I think we'll have to say thank you very much to we've run out of time. So thanks once again, Nick, for I think a very thought-provoking and splendid beginning. And 2 minutes just to have Jorge come down and we have his slides put up. And then I'll introduce Jorge. Yeah.
Thank you. That's also really exactly. Yes, and before I met Dave Morley.
Sí, yo creo que. A ver, sí que sí. ¿Tú sabes en cuál estudio debe ser uno de estos, no? A ver, Copenhagen, ¿sabes qué es este? ¿Es el tuyo? Ok. Go. Y él tenía un. Ahí está. ¿Funciona? Sí. Okay. Okay, I think we'll move on to our next speaker. So for those of you in the room and also for the onliners, and I just heard in the break now that we are also having a good discussion going on Twitter right now, from Bangkok to Belop probably, from all over. That's good. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Professor Jorge González from the National University, the Autonomous National University of Mexico in Mexico City. Currently a visiting scholar at the Methodist University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And also a very productive, very well recognized Latin American media and cultural studies scholar, whose last book, I'm not quite sure if it's your last book, Jorge, but I have at least one of Jorge's many books here and many more in my office. And this is the one called Between Cultures and Cyber Cultures, Incursions and Other Roots, Nonlinear Roots. Is that the right translation? This was the translation from the Spanish book, which is here. Jorge has worked a lot with popular culture, with mapping of cultural and media practices, and is currently doing a research in Brazil and Mexico, empirical research. So I hope for an interesting connection between Nick's reflections and Jorge's presentation. Welcome, Jorge, to Roskilde.
Thank you. Testing, can you hear me? No? You should probably have to... Yeah, now. It's okay? Perfect. I thank you very much, my friend and colleague, Thomas Tufte, for this invitation. I accepted, as you, immediately, at once, because it's an opportunity for me, to test, really, to test my bad for the English, and also to test how to put in this word, in this beautiful language, as English is too, how to put this, my contemporary research, and not only empirical, but also theoretical. So I will try to manage in my, maybe I will be asking for help in my bad English, some really complicated, sometimes, concepts. But the idea will be to place one or 2 points, very important. My main claim in this conversation is that the way in which, following, I think, I celebrate, following some highlights that Nick has posed, that we have to reorganize, we have to reconceptualize the way in which we are studying now the relationship between society and technology, but especially from that point of view, a point of view from Latin America, from poor Asia, from Africa, from those countries that cannot be understood, his poverty, only as if we cannot manage that as a process of being impoverished. So, my point will be, I think, is like that. Okay, problems, the words are global, technologies, public spheres, and that that means cyber, or not cyber, cibercultura. I used to say in Spanish, cibercultura. And the first one, as the guess, I want to show some photographs. You see, these people, it's a mule, a donkey, another one that was vase, a cup of water there in the desert, and one could see this is the same place. No, it's not. These three of Mexico in Charcas, in the desert, the middle of the desert of Charcas, Mexico. This is my compa Meme, and this other, también this is Charcas, are Sertão do Brasil, the desert, the semi-desertic parts of Brazil. But note, please, that the container, complicated. The container are exactly the same. They are blue, plastic, and more or less the technology for transporting water is more or less the same. So, from the first world, you could say, oh yes, they are the same. No, they are not, but they are. They are not, but they are. In which way? So, let me advance a little bit more. The world, our world, nice world. It's going to be at the end of December, according to the Mayas. So, Charcas is there, in the middle of the desert. Borborema is there, in the state of Paraíba. The photographs belong to that. And I didn't put more photographs because we have also some colleagues networking in Maghreb, in Africa, in Patagonia, Argentina. The problem of water, practical problem, is not a concept, it's not a construction, it's water. People are dying, are suffering, are trying to organize their lives to survive in a very, very complicated environment. And how about the theory? Let's theorize a little bit more. Then, we're facing global problems with local consequences, practically, directly connected with the point of Nick. So, let's advance a little bit more. It's my beautiful country. There is Charcas. In the middle of the semi-desertic part of Mexico, Charcas is a very tiny town, 10,000, 11,000 inhabitants. That town has been created by a mining since 1562, 67 until now, without stopping the production, the extraction, 1 they in more than 4 centuries. And mining is a very interesting neoliberal, indeed, form of extracting social and human energy. I'm talking about social and human energy, because capital is not money, is not land. It's a social relation, it's a social energy. So that produces a kind of culture, very interesting, that I will call a 0 Kelvin degree culture of organization, and because a number of things I'm not to talk now. So they're in Charcas, because the main research, 5 years devoted in there, making ethnographic research, archive, documentary research, and life histories, family histories, entering there. The second is how it's taking that our government with the I call technophilia. Interesting because this thing. I'm sure you can guess what exactly is that. Could be a coral is called coral. Any guess? It's a beautiful fractal image of fashionably fractals. But no, it's not. Probably has that shape. That is the photograph that MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, made from the internet notebook. It's beautiful. It's a pity, the light, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And of course, that can say that if you are there, for instance, in Africa or in Certain or in Charcas or here, you can connect everybody. You can go. You can connect. You can create social networks and virtual networks, and beautiful. But there's something called geopolitical shape of the world. That is not exactly that beautiful image. Is that one? Hey, that changed a little bit. This is the backbone of the internet. As you can see, there's a number of really occupied spaces there, and some lines very clear. And I'm sure that I was yesterday in the museum there in downtown, visiting the beautiful part of the Vikings and the medieval Nordic towns, and I'm pretty sure that probably here, Greenland, and probably there, Siberia, it's white, more or less. But why in Africa is white? Maybe the Kilimanjaro and lost the glaciers recently, or here. And the problem is that yes, there's empty spaces, or almost. But this is the real backbone of internet. And when you have a government and state also, these words, that accept gently the suggestions of the World Bank, talking about if you have poor people, if you want to, to let that condition, you have to connect. You have to be educated. You have to access, that's the word, access content, access information, access knowledge. Because all these countries, it's a coincidence. What a coincidence. Look at that. This is from your colleagues. No, not in Goldsmith, but this is an image of global cities. Global defined as flows of capitals, flows of persons, flows of informations, flows of images. And of course, we have some hits there. Mexico, Caracas, São Paulo, Santiago, Buenos Aires. Unfortunately, we don't have any in Africa. Kuala Lumpur, Singapore, I don't know. This is not precisely poor societies, indeed. But there's more. This is recently. It's very interesting. The top 15 Facebook countries by number of users at the beginning of this year. Interesting because the first one is, of course, the United States. Let me see. The second one is Indonesia. The third one is India. Some accounts has not fits very well. There's some there in India, whatever. In Mexico is the 5th. Brazil is the 4th. Interesting. So I read the other day that the majority of users of Facebook, social media network, comes from Asia. Summing up is incredible. But there's more. Another image. That one. That's a pity. It's too light. But it is the global flows of scientific collaboration. This is, of course, New York, Boston, California, Madison, whatever. This, of course, UK, France, part in Spain. Look at that. Some really brilliant Japan. There's some São Paulo there. Mexico there. And, just for this one. Can you? No, if you, okay, that's no problem. Just this really black world. Dark one. The light represents the exchanges, the scientific exchanges in society. So that is exactly to say that if we Mexicans want to know more about Guatemala, Colombia, or Brazil, we have to go to UT Austin, to Texas, to the marvelous library they have there. About the best and the most important library about Latin America in the world. They have more information of us. If I want to know what is happening in the desert, I have to go there, or to Paris, or maybe to London. And what? Why? Because the world, in terms of knowledge, it's also divided in terms of subjects of knowledge. Lots of links. In objects of knowledge, scarce or no links at all. Is that a problem? Indeed. My point, I'm going to be much further. My point is we need to recreate, to rename, to reconceptualize not only the theory, but the theory that orients always politics in terms of not all these images, but thinking and rethinking what is happening there and why it's happening there. Understanding processes, not only characteristics, properties, the properties of how many are connected, the process, social processes. And because of that, I'm not talking anymore about poor countries. Poor countries is like a condition. No, it's an effect of the process of continually extraction of energy in any terms. So, private sphere. The public sphere, defined by Otto Guberni, in whatever the private sphere is the place of citizens talking freely, elaborating, metabolizing discourse, talking, reorganizing. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. and the creation of state, the power, the division of powers of the state, the private part, the public part. Very interesting, but it's not exactly the case in a lot of the world. We have no that thing. We don't have exactly that thing. Why not? It's because of our race. It's because of we are less talented, less gifted. No, it's because of history of geopolitics that produced those images, that very loaded images. So, problem is that one. No differentiation, weak integrations. Because knowledge consists, the creation of knowledge consists in generate better differentiations and more comprehensive and useful integrations of the experience. Knowledge is not a virtuality. Knowledge is a strategy of the human species to survive, to break negative feedback loops, to break no-end streets, sin salida, no exit. This, precisely of that, I love that novel that you mentioned, and some other novels like The Cavern and some others, and then Saramago was constantly struggling and fighting that spirit of neoliberalism. So let me just enter a little bit more. The geopolitical system of distributed, I don't know how to say in English, this knowledge, not knowledge. In Spanish, we can say conocimiento and use desconocimiento. I don't know. No, but I want to play with the word knowledge. In English, it's not possible. But okay, ignorance. Ignorance sounds. I want to. But like, as languages are alive, probably we can. As Portuguese in Brazil, they adopt a little thing. I love that because they use words. I was for the first time in Brazil, and one of my colleagues talked to me, and let's go to the shopping center. Oh, good. I understand immediately, but I say, oh, please, I want to learn. How in Portuguese you say shopping center? They tell me, shopping center. No, but I insist, in Portuguese. In Portuguese is shopping center. Perfect. Okay, I get. So, this geopolitical system of distributed ignorance, of non-cognition, tends to perpetuate the social and assumed condition of and people's self-perception as they perceive themselves as objects. Charcas, Paraíba, were designed as objects of study. We Latin Americans love to be studied. We love to be object of study. Sorry. Bronislaw Malinowski go to Mexico to study Indians. Mexico. Claude Lévi-Strauss went to Bahia de Guanabara to study also, escaping from Hitler. Studying, we love to be studied. Really, indeed, we love. And there's some civilization, there's some part of societies that really have developed a lot of tools. They are masters in creating systems of information. One, just a little tale. Alexander von Humboldt. He get off the boat in Acapulco in the Pacific and walk along 6 or 7 months in Mexico, watching the mining. And he classified half the country. He produced taxonomies, classifications. Incredible. Yes, so this history of that is amazing. So how can we, from that part of the world, dialogue with this part of the world, the luminous part of the world? How can we talk if we are not, our perceptions are subjects no, sub is Spanglish. Spanglish. So, like a king has. Oh, but it doesn't fit good. Yeah, but okay. Subalterns, subalterns, and I don't know. So far away from citizens. So we need to face that, not only in terms of the governed, not only in terms of teaching or theorizing, but in terms of practical action. So it's a negative feedback loop that in Portuguese I asked in Manaus how to say positive feedback loop, the contraire, and in Portuguese they told me loop de feedback positivo. Loop de feedback positivo. Gostei. I love Portuguese in Brazil. They are very open and transform, create words, name the world. I like that. So, I'm finishing. I call in front the word Cibercultura. Cyber has anything to do with computers. Nothing to do with computers. Nevertheless, the visibility, as my friend and colleague, Johnny B. Good Thompson said, the media visibility is like computers. No, in the beginning, from Plato and some others, and Arturo Rosenbluth from Mexico, nobody knows him, and they know Nobel Wiener. But they wrote together. They worked together in Mexico. I was shocked when I noticed that the book, the seminal book, Cybernetics, or Communication in Animals and Humans, was written in Mexico City, near from my home. Why? Because they collaborate a lot. Oh, wait. So, that Kubernetes, steerman, pilot, conductor, governor, the same root, govern, comes from Kiber. Kultur, cultivate. Can be, I mean that part about in my idea, challenging the big, the high stream of conceptualized cyber culture as a metaphoric hallucination of that happens, like made Gibson, the Matrix, a hallucination that occurs in the middle of the machines. Interesting, yes, but prefer to do that. I used to say that to give 1 or 2 steps backwards. I'm not claiming that the current theorization of this process of relationship between technology and society is bad. But no, I think this must be continued. But we need, especially from the countries of the zones of the world that have been devastated, de-energized, we have to rethink and conceptualize, not only using theory, creating theory, in order to face that. So, that capacity of self-steering, capacity of self-determination, can be developed, can be cultivated, because cultivated, and I used that sign, the @ sign, because it's the closest graph to a positive feedback loop. I mean, a chain of processes that is not closed, that's open, that breaks the dead end. At the end, can be broken. Those dead ends that are experienced in real life, in real social life, geopolitical life. It has to do a lot with say no and say yes. But the problem is also that it's not easy to do that in those countries that we were trained, designed to be subjects, to obey. No? The master is exactly, I think he's from Britain, of course, Lewis Carroll, when is Humpty Dumpty talking with Alice. My Spanglish is Alice. And all of a sudden, Alice didn't understand anything, any word, because he's changing a lot. And has stopped him. Hey, I don't understand what you're talking about. And we say, oh, the problem is that it's not important if you don't understand. You have to understand who is the master. Simply. I talk because I have the power to talk. Why not? I can't say any content, whatever. Nevertheless, it's exactly like that is happening in the world. And all the efforts of G. So, ahora estoy falando, no sé qué. All the efforts of the World Bank, I love World Bank, to be, let's let the poor get the computers with bicycle energy and whatever. So very interesting. Are creating for customers for the future because poor are many more than rich. And with a little bit that the poor in the world can invest, 2 crowns, $100, is a lot amount of energy that the beast needs to swallow again. So, the project, I jumped that, we are doing participant observation, interviews in depth, family histories, life histories, cultural cartographies that you were talking, workshops, discussions, groups, participation in other local activities, and knowledge dialogue with specialists. Because when the people begins to organize themselves, that for me is exactly to cultivate culture of communication. Communication is not only exchanging of messages or creation of meaning, of production of, but it's 2 steps backwards, has to do with coordination of actions. It's a biological concept. It's not a semiotical one. Biological coordination of actions, and in order to that has to do in social species with society, with social bonds, with social organization, forms of organization. And yes, imagine if we could connect these points that are struggling against this the extinction of the waters, of the water vessels, the water, the rain. Imagine the amount of knowledge, local knowledge, traditional one, common sense, classified by the real knowledgers, the barons of the knowledge. Imagine the amount of energy, of knowledge, of information that could be exchanged to, in the history of confrontation, this condition. So the problem is, finishing, that here, the people in Charcas believe that is their own problem. Only happens here. Because they're having fun. They could use exactly the Hotmail, and yes, but the problem is there. Problem is the same thing here. It probably a lot of people are here also. So my presence in Brazil is trying to study not the degree, the zero degree that we are studying here. It's a very interesting society as a model of 0 degree, 0 Kelvin, minus 273 degrees of organization. It's really sad. This is the territory of the drug dealers, Zetas. We are working in the middle of the narco power in land. Because people abandoned public sphere. Has any in the time existed a some kind of public sphere there? Or what forms of public sphere existed there? Abandoned, and you cannot abandon social spaces because any other power will be immediately to occupy. And you are unfortunately out. So the problem is that if using I consider a Latin American contribution, I think is renowned, but a contribution to, like Paulo Freire, like some others that have worked in Latin America contesting powers, military powers, drug dealers' power, contesting that, using tools of conscientization to regenerate, appropriate the tools for creating their own systems of information. Is quite possible. We are experiencing that, and it's perfectly possible. Their own systems of communication. First of all, being able to identify the social forms using Simmel, the social forms in which we communicate. Remember Humpty Dumpty and others. It's not the problem of the content, it's the problem of the relationship. That is clear, Mackley, in that sentence. And imagine that they're creating knowledge confronting problems, practical problems, and then create local knowledge and begin the exchange and the exchange of experiences and the knowledge and a system of information of the same global problems. It's interesting because that prisma, I tried to design a prisma, is the face of global knowledge. Because we are global knowledge in these terms is always should be rooted in local, in territory, but is not blind to the creation, the constructions of the relationship that has the process that has created these problems and these problems and these problems there. So we are trying to compare, and they are exchanging, they begin to exchange these things. And in the middle, we are trying to study, following Jean Piaget and Rolando Garcia, how a determined structure of knowledge can be maximized, is the word of Piaget, into another one. How the structure, less differentiating and less badly, roughly integrated, how is possible to create another one. It's exactly the work that Paulo Freire made in Brazil. So we're using that, approaching that, and creating this this threefold. How do you name it? I know this. It's not part of my knowledge of the museum. Sorry. Braid. Yeah. Okay. So the women here the braid. It's a braid of information, communication, and knowledge. So this is a part of the dimension of analysis of any symbolic ecologies, part of the human species. I don't recognize the useful metaphor of the information society. Very interesting. No. UNESCO, knowledge society. Tell me, please, one society existed in the world, in the history of the world, the Paleolithic until now, that has now been based their symbolic ecologies and information, communication, and knowledge. So it's more for journalism, interesting. But in terms of concepts, not very useful, I think. So, but the problem is not only that. We are trying to, I tell that, help facilitate developing of their own systems, cultures, and ecologies in order to transform the ecology. I use the concept ecology, because you can't escape with the concept of ecology to think in processes. And that's the very deep problem in teaching and education. We used to think, to understand things like Emile Durkheim said, things. No, the processes. The properties of the thing depends on the structure, and the structure depends on the transformation of the process. That's exactly part of that is any discipline in science works like that, but also any single, the advance of Piaget, Rolando Garcia, any single human being, any single organization works exactly the same way. So let's enter a little bit in that. And how? This is from Borborema. People organized. They are re-elaborating the family farms, agricultural family farms, and reorganizing in very intensive ways, contesting the market, contesting the policies of Famicero in the land that was raped, was totally devastated. Devastated. And at the same time, this is my people in Charcas. They are trying to do that. This is Doña Pancha. Healer, using plants. She is, as Humboldt, a system of information with legs. Knows a lot about plants in the desert, how to heal, but this is not knowledge. This is common sense knowledge. It's not recognized by the academia. So, and the objective is to be able to re-narrate. They are trying to retell their past, relocate the present, and redefine other possible worlds. Because of that, Cibercultura, con arroba, with the at of the end, is our main topic and will be for the next few years. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Well done. I think this is just on the anecdotal level. It's a pleasure to have you here. September 2012. Exactly 25 years ago. 15. We had Paulo Freire here.
Ah, yes!
For the first and only time in Denmark, September 1987.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're talking about his areas of Sertão do Brasil. Anyway, let me open for a few comments. We are past this time. We should be into our coffee break, but a few comments and questions, and then we'll take them together and then close. And then you can respond. Yeah. Yes.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for your talk. It was very, very good. I'm very interested in the role the diaspora has to play in development of the South. How do you feel about this, or can you comment on how you think the people in the diaspora from Latin background, from African background, from Asian background can contribute to this idea of creating this global knowledge? Can you comment on it, please?
Thank you. Probably nobody understood anything.
Okay, well then, one more.
Yeah.
Thank you for your very interesting talk. And I was wondering what your thoughts would be about also changing the gaze from, which is, as you mentioned, from the north to the south, from the south to the north, so that knowledge about the north is created from a southern perspective.
Thank you. Yeah. Any other?
Okay, Jorge?
Yes. Briefly, the role of the diaspora. Yes, we began this. I mean, I didn't say that the outcome of the development, what I call the development of Cibercultur, is the creation of an emerging local knowledge community. And these emerging local knowledge communities are working. It's not short. It's a short number of people from the local working in that. And we also enter in contact because Mexico has large diaspora. For the United States, Los Angeles is, I think, is the second city in the world that speaks Spanish after Mexico City. It's amazing. Yes, what if the migrants, those that they don't migrate because of funny. They migrate because it's part of the global process of swallowing energy. Data. Europe. Now they're in crisis. The European community, in 2005, they needed to increase the population. They need 120 million people in the next 20 years, only to keep the lifestyle of them, only to keep that. And it's not the case of Denmark, but in Spain they have population rate is negative, and some other they are not reproducing, so they need badly human energy. Anthroponomy, as my colleague Daniel Berthaud named it, anthroponomy. They need badly that. So they are not going by pleasure. So what if they begin to recreate their own past, their own tale of the past in their land and in the other, because they are not abandoning. They're constantly sending money, bringing. So this is a project we proposed to Spain in 2005, Cibercultur and migration. I wrote an article of that, and it works very well. I also worked that in Austin, Texas. Austin is populated by Mexicans of San Luis Potosí, the same state. So it's I think it's exactly indicated in those cases in order to regenerate memories. Mm-hmm. And the second comment, yes, indeed, it's part of changing the gaze, changing the accent, not only to reverse the north-south gaze, now the south-north gaze, yes. Not only to reverse, but in terms of knowledge, it's impossible, scientifically speaking, impossible not to taking a position in any single science, and especially in the science, when the science looks at society, every single theoretical framework depends on a position taken in terms of. So this position taken, that called Boaventura, some others, from south to north, has to do a little bit with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we have let's make it a 20-minute break. Be back at 10 minutes to 12. Coffee outside.
Really?
That's enough.
Estava falando português há 4 meses, não lembro nada.